Patrick Queen and DeShon Elliott sounded off against their former team in the Baltimore Ravens. We talk about what they had to say and so much more coming up next here on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day, free and available for you, all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, you can follow along and subscribe as well. We bring you 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Today's crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens is presented by PrizePicks. Down the app today, use code LOCKEDON NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Ravens and Steelers week is in full effect. We've got plenty of spicy comments from all over the place on the Steelers side. On the Ravens side, we got some comments as well. And two former Ravens, Patrick Queen and DeShon Elliott, sounded off on the Ravens, their situations, and kind of what ended up happening as they left the team. DeShon Elliott, obviously, a couple of years ago. Patrick Queen last offseason. We're going to talk about that and a lot more with Chris Carter, the host of Locked On Steelers for Crossover Thursday. But Patrick Queen ended up saying he wasn't wanted back with the team. Said, quote, "I didn't get the offer back. It was definitely kind of upsetting, been there for 4 years and the bond that you grow with your teammates." And said he felt the type of way about it. Didn't really get over it until late August, early September. But he was talking about how, anybody in this position would have feelings this week, and I'm sure Patrick Queen's going to be fired up. And then DeShon Elliott was talking about how, well, the Ravens had an opportunity to bring him back in the offseason when he left, but they ended up going and signing Marcus Williams instead, and actually made a comment about how the players who leave Baltimore end up getting better and go on to be great. And I'm sitting there kind of like, I don't know about that one. He said a lot of those players do. I don't think that's true. I mean, we have a lot of circumstances where that doesn't happen. Sure, it does happen. I'm not saying it never does. There are certainly players from the Ravens who have gone on, been great other places, but more often than not, you hear about how a player leaves the Ravens and they end up falling off a cliff, or they don't do great production-wise. So that is what I think that story actually says, instead of DeShon's version of it, where a lot of players go on to play better and be great, and was, talking a lot. So we'll talk about what both Patrick Queen, DeShon Elliott had to say in more detail with Chris coming up now.
Kevin, it's Steelers-Ravens week. It's back, baby. It took 10 weeks, but the Steelers are finally playing a divisional game. Don't know why the NFL did this to us, but here we are.
Hey, well, welcome to the AFC North party, right? 10 weeks, Steelers don't have a divisional game. Ravens have already had 3 of them. They've gone 2-1. Crazy. And this one is the biggest one. This is essentially battle for first place in the AFC North as it stands right now. Pittsburgh coming in 7-2, Baltimore 7-3. And you have a lot on the line here. And we talk about this rivalry all the time. I know that over recent years, some people have said, it's lost some of that intensity, lost some of that rivalry shine. But man, we've gotten a lot of quotes this week from both sides that maybe it's juicing up this rivalry once again here.
It certainly is. And you're right. I think part of it was like both teams had their successes. So like the Ravens were Super Bowl champions, and they kind of like there was a mutual respect there, and the hatred of the Ray Lewis days and Ed Reed and Hines Ward, those kind of went to the wayside. They still don't like each other, but they don't hate each other nearly as much. But oh boy, did some stuff get said in the Steelers locker room on Wednesday. Patrick Queen saying on his being let go from Baltimore, he said, quote, "I wasn't wanted back. I didn't get the offer back. It was definitely kind of upsetting, being there for 4 years and the bond that you grow with your teammates." He said, "You put your body on the line every single time that you go out there, even when you can barely move your leg or whatever the injury may have been. So I definitely feel a certain type of way after the whole situation, but I'm over it now." Doesn't sound like he is, Kevin. Sounds like he has a lot to say there. Patrick Queen was a guy that, just last year he had some, thoughtful words about the Steelers-Ravens rivalry, and now he's on the other side of it. And Kevin, it seems interesting to me. You got him saying that, DeShon Elliott going on Marlon Humphrey's podcast, calling the Dolphins soft, Arthur Marlette talking. There's a lot of interesting bars being thrown around right now.
Yeah, and I know that when Patrick Queen signed over with Pittsburgh in the offseason, a lot was made of it from Patrick Queen himself. I mean, again, his introductory press conference, he said he wanted to take on that villain role. And, with the Baltimore situation, I mean, he revealed, and I think he might have mentioned it before, but he definitely made it clear during his press conference on Wednesday that Baltimore did not offer him a deal to come back to the Ravens. And I think that it definitely hurt him because he's still talking about it, and actually went into more specifics and said that he didn't really get over it until late August, early September when the games ended up starting, and that he definitely did feel a certain type of way about it. Said that he hasn't talked to John Harbaugh or Eric DeCosta since signing with the Steelers. So, this is going to probably be about as juiced up as we see Patrick Queen all season, I'm sure, because of all of the feelings and the emotions. And I think that's what this rivalry needs, right? I think some of that juice is going to be good for it, and some good old trash talking, so some good old, talk on the field. That to me is going to be huge. And the Ravens, they didn't offer Patrick Queen a deal because they paid Roquan Smith and they brought him in. He was the guy essentially you had to choose. In Baltimore, I'm sure didn't feel comfortable paying 2 big money contracts to inside linebackers. So for Patrick Queen, he did a lot of good things in Baltimore, especially when playing next to Roquan. I think Roquan unlocked another level of him in Baltimore, and obviously he's gone on to Pittsburgh. I know it was a bit of a rough start for PQ to start off the year, Chris, but as we saw in that Commanders game, I think that was his best game of the year. So I'm expecting to see Patrick Queen all sorts of fired up, and then we haven't even gotten to DeShon Elliott, but I want to talk to you about Queen, because how has he looked in Pittsburgh so far this season?
So he started off the season rough against the Falcons, missed 4 tackles in that game, and then he was kind of up and down for a little while. But then when he came out of the bye, he looked sharp as all get out in that Commanders game. He was flying all over the field. He was contesting the run at the right spots, and I think that was the thing, is he just had to figure out his run fits and when he could be aggressive, when he needed to hold back and find that pace. At least for this game last week, he found that, and that was the number 4 rushing offense in the NFL, one of the top, also like the number 3 scoring offense in the NFL at the time, in the Commanders that they faced. And he also showed hey, that sideline to sideline speed. They called it QB option, and the edge went in on the running back, and so Jaden Daniels tucked the ball, tried to hit the sideline. Patrick Queen went from the middle part of the formation to the sideline, limited what should have been a 10-yard gain to a 3-yard gain, and so he's showing that. He's also playing better in coverage. And I think he's kind of being the player the Steelers need. And I said all along, when they signed Patrick Queen, it was not for him to take over the defense. They still got Minkah Fitzpatrick. They still got TJ Watt. They still got Cam Hayward. Alex Highsmith's hurt right now, but they're loaded with guys that are game changers. They just need Patrick Queen to be a really good linebacker that pieces it all together. And I think he's starting to do that, Kevin.
Yeah, and that obviously for the thing with PQ coming into the league was he came in during the COVID year, didn't really have a ton of experience at LSU in terms of getting big reps in season after season. And so it was hard for him and that entire 2020 class to get a rhythm. Certainly struggled in coverage, struggled with some of his decisions, got benched against Kansas City during his rookie season. And, that's a big wake-up call. But I think we started to see that evolution in year 3. And then when Roquan came in, we started to see the big evolution from Patrick. So I think, to me, rivalry week with Patrick Queen versus Derrick Henry, I think everybody's going to be watching that first meeting in the middle between those two, seeing who wins. But a couple of years ago, DeShon Elliott won a meeting in the middle between Derrick Henry and himself. Now, that was when Derrick was in Tennessee and DeShon was in Baltimore, but that was a big forced fumble play, or I think he might have been down, but he jarred the ball loose. But DeShon went on Marlon Humphrey's podcast, and Marlon was like, okay, well, DeShon, what's it like being a little bit of a lack of loyalty guy now, full-blown traitor, kind of in a jesting but not so much way. And DeShon Elliott was like, hold on a second, I'm not going to say traitor, because the Ravens actually had an opportunity, he said, to sign him back, but they decided to go and get Marcus Williams. DeShon Elliott went on, has played for a bunch of different teams. Now Pittsburgh, his latest stop, but he goes to a Steelers team where he's not required to be the best safety on the team. Obviously, Minkah Fitzpatrick has that honor. He kind of found a career revitalization in Pittsburgh this season.
He certainly has. He's been huge for them against the run. He's been helping against the pass. He helps underneath, and he can kind of be that strong safety the Steelers have needed, and kind of wanted Terrell Edmunds to be. They wanted Edmunds to be a little bit more physical, and DeShon Elliott's being that. He's helping a lot against the run. he's been a great fit for what the Steelers have needed. And you look right now, a colleague of mine, Derek Bell, who does a lot of great Steelers analyst work, he pointed out, hey, Minkah Fitzpatrick doesn't have any interceptions this season, but you know what team is giving up the fewest amount of passing yards down the middle part of the field? It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've allowed the fewest receptions and the fewest receiving yards in the middle part of the field this season. And a lot of it is because teams are not throwing it to Minkah Fitzpatrick, and DeShon Elliott is contributing to that by helping take away tight ends, running backs, helping against the run. They're figuring they're figuring some things out, and I think they're getting sharper with how they're disguising things too, because they've had a lot of injuries here and there that have kind of held guys back, and now guys are fully healthy. And I think one thing you're going to start to see is more disguises as far as where the coverages are leading, more disguises where the pass rush is coming from. They're flipping TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith a little bit now, though Alex Highsmith will be out for this game. Preston Smith will be in there. Nick Herbig should be back this week. This is a Steelers defense that those guys have fit very well into. And it's interesting how passionate they sound about this rivalry game coming to the other side of it. And how like that kind of contrast with like Deontay Johnson, who seemed kind of not too enthused about it. Like about, he wasn't looking for a revenge game. He's just more like, hey, I'm just excited to see what happens this week.
Yeah, Deontay very complimentary during his media availability on Tuesday about the Steelers, saying it's going to be weird to be in the away locker room. He's never been in the away locker room, so this will be his first time actually doing that, and said, he still talks to guys over there and has good relationships. Obviously, during rivalry week, you're kind of like, hold on, put all that to the side for a week. But again, he's a new part on the other side of the rivalry. But Arthur Millette said that, look, you're not a Raven until you beat the Steelers, right? That's a big thing in Baltimore. And obviously the Steelers have had the Ravens number over the last handful of seasons. In the last 8 games, the Ravens are 1-7 against the Steelers. And look, some of that has to do with the fact that in a couple of these games, the Ravens have been resting their starters, and week 18 is the 1 seed, or, last year in Acrisure, just drops galore for the Ravens wide receivers, and that contributed to Baltimore's loss. But, a win is a win, and a loss is a loss. And right now, Pittsburgh, I think the last win was the Duck Hodges overtime game, the Marlon Humphrey punch on Juju. Was that it?
That was the last time I think Lamar won.
Yes, okay.
But remember, there was the Kenny Pickett game where he got injured and Mitch Trubisky came in, and then Chris Boswell missed like 2 field goals. I think one got blocked by
that was when Roquan and PQ each had an interception, right?
Yes.
Okay, yep. Yeah. So there we go. Lamar's last win was the Peanut Marlon Humphrey game, but the Ravens' last win. Okay, yeah. So still not a great record for the Ravens. And look, Lamar will be the first to tell you, and he did on Wednesday, that the Steelers defense has given him the most trouble. He doesn't necessarily know why. He said the rivalry atmosphere and a bunch, but credit where credit is due, even though as hard as it is being Ravens Steelers rivalry week, that Pittsburgh defense has found a way to shut Lamar down and has certainly been Lamar's kryptonite over the years.
Well, we'll talk about both the pass defenses going into this, because I think that's a huge part of this. The Ravens pass defense ranks last in the NFL as far as yards allowed, but Mike Tomlin said on Tuesday to not overlook them. He feels like part of that is because teams have to keep up with the high-powered offense of the Ravens. We'll talk about both pass defenses going into this game next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Kevin Ostreicher, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you that this show is also brought to you by Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College, time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through some mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free online courses, including Constitution 101, Intro to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and so much more. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, and enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Hillsdale.edu/lockedon. We're also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook, you can go in and you can bet on anything from NFL, NBA, NHL, college sports, and so much more. And right now, if you look at Steelers Ravens, here's your upcoming lines. The Steelers went from 3.5 point home dogs to being 3-point home dogs. That line holds going into Thursday. However, the Ravens and Steelers money lines both moved. The Ravens were 172 earlier this week. It's now at minus 180. The Steelers were at plus 144. It's now at plus 152. The over-under remains at 48.5. High-scoring affair coming. We'll see here. But bet on all of those odds, ends, and lines at FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. And if you're a new customer and you bet $5 today and you hit on that $5 bet, you can get started with $150 in bonus bets. That's right, $150 of free bets today to new customers if you just hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Only on FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens. Kevin, let's talk about the pass defense. You were talking about the Steelers defense in general. They do seem to have Lamar's number. The last time he beat them was that Devlin Hodges fumble game. And you look at his numbers, and again, I want to be fair to Lamar because I feel like there's a lot of people, especially in Pittsburgh, that take joy in punching at the guy and saying things. But like last year, like the one play that was his fault was the Joey Porter interception. That wasn't a good decision. But there were so many big plays dropped by Ravens receivers in that game, and it still came down to Kenny Pickett hitting George Pickens for a big touchdown at the end of the game. I look at Lamar Jackson and I see a guy who's having another MVP caliber season. And I gotta wonder, from your side of the rivalry, what do you think that the Ravens need to do to counter what the Steelers do on defense that's been limiting him? Because I think there's a specific way, and I want to see where your head's at.
Well, I think for me, for Baltimore, a lot of what they've been able to do this season has been predicated on play action. And part of that is obviously Derrick Henry is now in Baltimore, and there's just a different level of gravity that Derrick Henry provides, where Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, they were awesome in Baltimore with Lamar, but Derrick Henry's just he's a different type of dude, different type of dude. So I think when you establish the run early, or at least when Baltimore has been able to do that, and teams say, all right, we're going to stack the box and try to take this away, the play action, those linebackers bite down super hard on that. And Lamar has been much better this season. Usually, Chris, it's over the course of Lamar's career, it was, all right, well, Mark Andrews and maybe Zay Flowers, maybe Marquise Brown, and nobody else. It was really the Mark Andrews show in the passing game. He didn't involve Zay Flowers or Marquise back when he was with the team, but now he's spreading the ball all around. So one game, it'll be like last week, Tylan Wallace had the big play against Cincinnati, or maybe Rashad Bateman will get involved, or maybe somebody else. So you leave these guys one-on-one, and even when you bring Deontay Johnson into the equation, these guys are all great separators. And I think that can help, especially if Pittsburgh does decide to stop the run. Now, something Pittsburgh has going for them is that they can rush effectively with 4 or without blitzing. And Lamar, the book used to be, especially in that Miami game back in 2021, will just do cover 0 the whole time, and he can't beat it. And that's what happened in that Miami game. Well, now it's almost impossible to blitz Lamar because he's been improving as a decision maker each and every season, with him spreading the ball around and taking the short stuff. That's something that people were screaming from the rooftops here, was if something's available short, just chuck it down there and your guy will go get you 8 or 10 yards. So I think that the way that Pittsburgh operates, they have enough talent to have a guy go somewhere and not have it be a liability for somewhere else, because the individual talent is great and they play as a team. But it essentially comes down to, can Lamar Jackson find those spots in the middle of the field, which, again, Pittsburgh has been really good at defending? Or is it going to be a matter of, do you force feed Mark Andrews? Is this a big Zay Flowers game against the Pittsburgh secondary? It's going to be interesting to see how Pittsburgh attacks Lamar Jackson, because even if you blitz him, you're probably not going to have a good time. But if you don't blitz him and you don't get pressure, he can just sit back there. And the thing that he's now doing is he's now drawing defensive holding calls and pass interference penalties, because when he escapes out of that pocket, he sits back there and floats, and he's just looking for somebody. And every second that a defensive back has to cover, it's less and less likely a guy can either stick with someone legally, or you got to turn and hold the guy and try to stop him from separating. So that, to me, is something. He's like the Torrey Smith of old here in Baltimore, just drawing all these PI penalties for the offense.
I look at where I think that the Steelers have to be very careful in this game, and something that I noticed with how they played the Giants. Now, this did not manifest against the Commanders, but one thing that the Giants, they got their run game going with Tyrone Tracy. And part of what I thought got it going was they used the option a lot with Daniel Jones, and the Steelers seemed really committed to limiting Daniel Jones and not letting him get started and not allow Tracy to get the run game going. If I'm the Ravens, I force you to show that you've gotten better at that. Now, it looked like they did against the Commanders last week, but as Mike Tomlin said, you should be slow comparing anyone to Mr. Jackson, as he kept calling him in his Tuesday press conference, showing the reverence he has for what is he a 2-time MVP or is he a 3-time already?
Two, okay. Hopefully 3 with the way he's playing. I mean, I'd be pretty shocked to find a front runner.
He has my vote right now for 3-time MVP because the way that he's playing. But the Steelers have that reverence for him. And that's the funny part. Like, Steelers fans like to make light of Lamar, but the Steelers don't. I think that's why they're so good against him, because I think that Lamar Jackson is a big reason why they've stuck to their formula of just trying to win with 4, because when you bring that extra rusher, then you are giving him, making things easier. You're trusting your guys to win their gaps, to collapse the pocket consistently, and then maybe have a spy floating around to keep their eyes on him in case something happens, and then allowing your covers to try to take things away and make it so that, hey, you got to beat us with your arm, and you got to beat us with your arm into tight passing windows consistently throughout the game, and that's the way the Steelers want to play. I'll be intrigued to see how those two mesh. But let's flip sides real quick here. The Ravens defense ranks last in the NFL as far as yards allowed per game. But Mike Tomlin alluded in his press conference saying, hey, part of that's because a lot of teams are throwing a lot to catch up with the Ravens because their offense is so potent. Kevin, do you buy that, or do you think that there are serious problems in this Ravens secondary right now? Injuries aside, because we will get to those in the next segment.
Yeah, there are serious problems. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This secondary is bad, and it's honestly shocking because they haven't really had to deal with a ton of injuries this season for the most part, and the talent level really was never the issue. I mean, Marlon Humphrey's having a great season. Kyle Hamilton, who we'll talk about, is all over the field. Even guys like Ardarius Washington are stepping up, but they have miscommunications, coverage busts, some stuff schematically hasn't really translated from Mike McDonald to Zach Orr in year 1 for Orr. And it's just a culmination of everything, because you look at the Ravens as a whole, Chris, and the pass offense is historic. The run offense is historic. The run defense is one of the best in the league. But this secondary and this pass rush have not been able to mesh for most of the season. The pass rush looked better against Cincinnati, but with who Cincinnati has on the offensive line, if it wasn't then, it was going to be never in terms of the pass rush being able to step up and contribute and do something. So Nnamdi Madubuike had 3 sacks and guys had moments. But quarterbacks will have all day to throw at times. We saw that against Cleveland with Jameis Winston, and we saw it with Bo Nix in Denver. And, when you go up against Cincinnati and Joe Burrow on Thursday night, you give him that time. And honestly, he didn't have it. But if you did, it would have probably been even worse. And Jamar went for 260 plus. So I'm shivering kind of thinking about what worse would have looked like for that secondary. But you're looking at a revitalized Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh right now. Pittsburgh obviously loves the deep ball, and you go get another deep ball guy in Mike Williams at the deadline, which obviously came to fruition very nicely in that Commanders game for Pittsburgh there at the end. But we know George Pickens is balling out this year. But the thing with the Ravens secondary is that obviously the game plan would be make someone else other than George Pickens beat you. Go make a Mike Williams beat you, or a Van Jefferson, or someone else. But we talked about that with Jamar Chase, and Jamar goes for 260 plus. Devontae Adams single-handedly beat the Ravens when he was really the only guy in Las Vegas he had to worry about back in the day when he was a Raider, which seems like 10 years ago at this point.
This is crazy.
But the Ravens have to be better in every aspect. Brandon Stevens, who played great last year for them, has regressed pretty poorly. Marcus Williams, the same thing. He's their $70 million man, and it's been really bad. They had to bench Eddie Jackson because he had one of the worst games I've ever seen in Ravens history against Cleveland. And they've also just had self-inflicted mistakes. Zach Orr's not the one going out there and dropping 5 interceptions in a game, but some of his calls are a little questionable. So it's everything in one for this Ravens secondary, and it's honestly one of the worst, if not the worst secondary in this franchise's entire existence.
Whoa, that is a heavy take there. I wanted to ask you this before we rolled into the injury questions. That's a big part of this. I was looking at numbers as far as who does what. And right now, if you look at tight end, defending the tight end position, the Ravens have allowed the most receptions in the NFL, 63 to tight ends, and 680 receiving yards to tight ends. That's third most in the NFL. Is that a unique problem that the Ravens are facing, that they're not covering tight ends well, or do you think that's just something circumstantial that's just kind of played out? Mike Tomlin would say, stats are for losers.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up because I think there are reasons, and the main one being Roquan Smith has regressed. And a lot of that has come in pass coverage, where when Baltimore brought him over from Chicago, one of the things he did great, and he did it his first year and a half in Baltimore, is a pass cover linebacker. He was one of the best in the league, alongside obviously everything else he brings to the table. But this year he's been getting absolutely worked over the middle of the field. And it was tough because I think Roquan actually helped. We go back to Patrick Queen. Roquan helped Patrick Queen in pass coverage a lot during their time together. And now Roquan has really taken a huge step back, and it's resulted in a lot of middle of the field opportunities, a lot of third down conversions over the middle. And even when he's being placed up against tight ends that he generally should have the athleticism to cover, it just seems like he doesn't have that right now. People have noticed he maybe came into the year a little bit heavier than usual, and maybe that has contributed to some of the lack of athleticism and speed as compared to years past. But I don't think it's a coincidence. I really just think that Baltimore's personnel has not been up to snuff, and that does start with Roquan, who is considered to be the leader of your defense, and alongside Kyle Hamilton, one of your best players.
And that's certainly a part of the equation there. I look at this as a situation for Russell Wilson has been really good at distributing the football and facilitating the Steelers' offense the last three games they've played. I think if he can find a way to get the ball to the tight ends in this game, maybe that's another way to kind of piece up the Ravens defense and not allow them to focus too hard on one player in George Pickens, and maybe build the balance that you want to see for the Steelers offense. But you talked about Kyle Hamilton. He's on the injury watch this week, as there are several players for both teams. We'll get to those injury concerns next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Kevin Ostreicher, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you, this show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you just pick more or less on the stat projections of 2 to 6 players, and then watch your winnings start to roll in. Prize Picks is the fun new daily fantasy game that everyone needs to start playing right now. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with any injury insurance policy. Your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup alive. And now on Prize Picks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as making 4 correct picks. Prize Picks includes NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, college sports, and so much more. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly when you play just $5. That's code LockedOnNFL to receive a $50 bonus just for playing $5. Prize Picks. Run your game. We're back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Kevin Ostreicher, Locked On Steelers, Locked On Ravens. Kevin, one of the bigger notes I think this week is Kyle Hamilton's injury. He was questionable at the start of the week. What is an update on what's going on with him?
Yeah, so on Wednesday, Hamilton did not practice. He was off on a side field working with the trainer in workout clothes. So he was out there, but not actually out there. The injury looked really bad when it first happened, and on replay it seemed like his foot got caught just barely under Mike Gesicki. I believe it was his foot. They kind of got tangled, and the ankle twisted in pretty badly. But the great news coming out of the game was it wasn't considered a serious injury. He has a shot to play. I'd probably call it 50-50 right now. I think that Friday's injury report will probably be the biggest one in terms of determining the game, as it usually is, right? But I think that the Ravens secondary, you talk about how poor they've been this season. Well, that comes with Kyle Hamilton being on the field for them. So obviously when he's not out there, that ceiling and the floor just plummets even further. And it'd be a big loss because he can do so much for them. Obviously they love to use him all over the place. He's their Swiss Army knife, and as a blitzer, middle of the field, up at the line, deep half. I mean, they do everything with him. And the drop-off between him and their next guy, which they're playing Darius Washington there right now, but it's a steep one. So Hamilton didn't practice on Wednesday, but a couple more days for him to get back on the field. And if he suits up, he'll probably be some level of limited, maybe a little, maybe a lot, but we'll see. Because he's a tough guy, and he's come out and played with injuries that people thought he'd be out for a month or two, and he's come back in like a week. So he's a tough guy.
He is a tough guy. I've seen him play. He's a tough player too. I think he's a really good player, and if he's in this game, it changes everything for the Ravens secondary because of what he brings to the table. Like you said, he's very versatile. He's athletic. It's funny. He ran a 4.8 time in the 40-yard dash, and I was like, nah, still pick him in the first round. And the Ravens were smart to do so because I was sitting there wondering like, ooh, how far does he fall? How far does he fall? And of course, Baltimore snatched him up. And I was like, well, there you go. So the Steelers are dealing with some injuries, not nearly as serious though. Now, Alex Highsmith is out. That is pretty serious. He's a pretty good edge rusher for the Steelers. But good news on a few fronts. Nick Herbig back into full practice on Wednesday. That means he's probably ready to go this week. Dante Jackson didn't practice with a hamstring injury, but Mark Caboli of the Pat McAfee show reported that he got an MRI and that he'll be cleared and that he's expected to play. Najee Harris didn't practice with an ankle injury, but Najee don't practice half the time because they know that he can just come in and play. I'm pretty sure he's going to play. Van Jefferson had a quad. Mike Tomlin did not mention him among the injured players going into this week, so I assume that that's also just a rest thing. So the Steelers, I think, largely healthy outside of Alex Highsmith in this one. Are there any other Ravens players, Kevin, that play into this that we should be watching out for the rest of the week?
Isaiah Likely would probably be the one. He missed last week with a hamstring injury. He was back at practice on Wednesday, so that's something to monitor. Calvin Noy missed practice on Wednesday, one of their big edge rushers, but that was due to an illness, so we'll see kind of as that progresses along the week. But other than that, Baltimore's pretty healthy right now, which is honestly quite a weird thing for me to say at this time in the year, considering the Ravens have really had pretty rotten injury luck over the last 5 seasons at this point in the year. Usually they got mini CVS receipts as their injury reports, but it's actually only 5 or 6 players right now. So they haven't really had to deal with a lot. It's been guys who've had to miss a game or two, like Marlon Humphrey, for example, is one of those names, but they just got Keaton Mitchell back off of injured reserve. I expect him to play a bigger role than he did against Cincinnati last week. That was kind of just his, welcome back game. Now I think he'll have more of a role carved out for him. Brent Urban returned to practice. He's dealt with a concussion the past couple of weeks. One of their D linemen, he was full, so I assume if everything's good there, he'll be good to go. The only guy they're really missing right now is Michael Pierce, who's on injured reserve, who's one of their big guys in the middle, who is a nightmare to block for opposing offensive linemen, but he's obviously not going to play. He's a guy that they miss. But Travis Jones has been dealing with an ankle injury over the last couple of weeks, but returned against Cincinnati. Well, he actually didn't miss a game. He didn't play in some of the games. It was very limited, but he looked back to himself, and he's one of the interior pass rushers that maybe not a lot of people know about right now, but you watch him play, and he's just an absolute game wrecker out there.
Agreed there. I think that this is you got to watch the injuries going into this week, but regardless of who is available, to me, this feels a little old school right now in that both the Steelers and the Ravens are atop the division, duking it out, and this is the first of 2 games. It just brings me back to like the heyday of when it was Hines Ward, it was Ray Lewis, it was Ed Reed, it was Troy Polamalu, and just you knew when the first time they met, there was going to be a second time, and both were going to be a lot of fun to watch. And it's the premier 1:00 game in a crazy slate of a weekend with all the games that are going to be going on. And I'm really interested to see how this plays out. I also am interested to see how Russell Wilson and Lamar Jackson contrast in their styles. Lamar Jackson is the engine that makes the Ravens go. I would say that Russell Wilson's become the point guard that allows the Steelers offense to make plays. And so it's kind of funny. You got a guy who's more of a facilitator, who kind of has all the assists, a John Stockton, if you will, in Russell Wilson. Meanwhile, you got like Steph Curry and Lamar Jackson. He's just jacking up the threes all over the place. And I'm really intrigued by who's going to find more success with their style of play going into this game.
Yeah, and Lamar, literally, Steph Curry was, chucking up on was touchdown in week 10. The Rashad Bateman did the follow through, the 3-point celly. He bought into that whole thing. So look, I think this is going to be one of those classic AFC North games. Maybe it's going to be, I think, more of an offensive game than maybe we're used to between Baltimore and Pittsburgh, just because Baltimore's pass defense has been so poor. And I think Baltimore's offense can exploit some of the things that Pittsburgh does very well. I think this is a really tough test for both sides. But I think that for the Ravens, if they can get off to a fast start, if they can establish the run against that Pittsburgh defense, and then obviously if they can get their pass offense going with everybody getting involved, I think that would be a nice path to victory on the Baltimore side of things. And, just a quick note, because we started with Patrick Queen and I had to end it with him too. He caused waves in Baltimore most controversial take of the offseason, talking about that Pittsburgh versus Baltimore food, and got the pierogies versus the crab cakes going on. We couldn't stand for it here. We could not stand for it in Baltimore. Look, I'm fine with pierogies. I like pierogies, but for me, the argument, and what is it? Permane Brothers is the big one in Pittsburgh with the sandwiches.
Look. I tell people all the time, Permane's is the tourism food. You come to Pittsburgh, I hook you up with all the real food. That's like going to Philly and say, I'm going to go to Geno's and Pat. Those are the tourism cheesesteak spots. You got to go to Joe's in West Philly to really experience a real Philly cheesesteak.
Okay, then what's the Pittsburgh real food then? Like, what do you go to Pittsburgh to get?
First of all, Pittsburgh's got insane pizza minios, where I think we have the most pizza bars per capita in the United States. We got amazing wings with Will Penn. We got amazing. And Permane's, look, they're a staple. Fries on a sandwich. That's the thing there. But like, I'll tell you, Pittsburgh, we have Polish Hill. We are a city of immigrants. We have all different styles pouring into Pittsburgh as for a much deeper, rich experience. A lot of Italian food here as well here. So that's the thing. Pittsburgh is just much more diverse than I think people give it credit for. They just stick to the fries on a sandwich thing because that's just the thing that you always see on TV.
Man, Baltimore, look, for my thing was with the crab cakes, it's always like, okay, you get, like, have you had a Maryland crab cake before? Like,
I love the crab cakes. Yeah.
Right. So it's like when you talk about crab cakes, it's like, okay, let's go get a Maryland crab cake, right? Do you say, let's go get a Pittsburgh pierogi or a Pittsburgh Permane Brothers? Like,
we didn't say we're going to Permane's, yeah.
Man, the crab cake, is Patrick Queen was like, I like real food. And I'm just like, okay, is seafood not real food? Like, what constitutes real food? So everybody, because Patrick Queen was like, okay, fine. Maybe you didn't like Baltimore. Maybe you feel at home with Pittsburgh, but you bring the food into it now. Like, now you're bringing the city. Like, okay, now we have to have a talk about this. Now we have to really talk.
That's gonna be great. Listen. I've enjoyed my time in Baltimore. I've enjoyed my time in Maryland. In fact, I was just in Maryland, and I had some crab cakes, and I do like it. I like Old Bay spice. Y'all throw that on everything over there. But listen, I dig it. But I understand Patrick Queen wanting to throw some jabs in there. It seems like that's what he does so well. But that's what I'm so excited for, Kevin. There's rivalry back, man. Both these teams are good at the same time. They're exciting at the same time. There's players that are talking smack to each other. And it's going to be a big showdown, 1 p.m. Acrisure Stadium.
Chris is great with his Steelers insight. Big week ahead for the Ravens and Steelers. Obviously, first place in the AFC North on the line here for now. So 2 good teams. The rivalry hopefully got some juice back in it here over the next couple of games, because you got one coming up now and then another coming up a little later through the year. So that's all I have for you today on this episode of Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button in video form, and follow along in audio form, and subscribe for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage plus more. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out our weekday episodes with more Ravens coverage, continuing to dive into the Ravens and Steelers matchup. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.